Hey there, y'all. My name's Nathan. I'm a guide for Endless River Adventures, and today we're going to be talking about how to properly take care of your dry gear. So we're going to start. You've just gotten off the river. It's time to take that dry suit off and go ahead and hang it to dry. First thing we want to think about when we're taking that off, or really when we're putting it on as well, is we want to be careful with those gaskets, that neck gasket, that wrist gasket. Um, Try not to put any undue strain on that thing, and we'll talk about some strategies later for making sure that those gaskets get on and off nice and easily. But for now, let's just say you want to be careful with those things and make sure you don't get a fingernail caught in those wrist gaskets on the way in or out. That's a really common way to tear those gaskets. So once we've got the dry suit off, we're going to find a good place to hang it. We want to keep this thing out of direct sunlight when we're just hanging it to dry. The UV and sunlight will degrade anything, but particularly it will degrade these fabrics and the gaskets, and you'll have a much shorter life for those gaskets if they get a lot of UV exposure. So we're going to find a place that's got good airflow, it's out of direct sunlight, and it doesn't have any temperature extremes, right? Inside of a really hot car probably isn't great. And a day like today where it's actually snowing outside, I definitely wouldn't be leaving my dry gear outside to dry. So we've got a good spot, and now we're going to go ahead and turn this dry suit or dry top inside out to dry the inside first. When we hang this up, we want to make sure that we're not hanging it by any of these gaskets. So a hanger through the neck can actually be um, a little bit rough on those gaskets over time. Usually I'll just go ahead and take the arms of my dry suit or dry top and just throw it over a clothesline. That seems to work quite well. Um, but we're going to dry the inside of this thing first for a couple of reasons. First of all, that's going to give us a chance to clean off the inside of the suit. And also because if you don't have a lot of time to dry that suit, you want to go ahead and make sure that the interior of that suit is going to be the dry part, right? If you got to use it the next morning, it's going to be nice to have the inside of that dry suit nice and dry, even if there is still some moisture on the outside, right? Once that is nice and dry on the inside, we're going to go ahead and brush off any excess grit. That's really important for the life of the suit or the top. And then we're going to go ahead and turn it right side out and dry it the same way on the outside. And we'll go ahead and brush the grit off of the outside as well. Make sure you're not skipping that step of cleaning this thing off. Having a lot of grit working its way into the fibers of the suit or getting stuck up inside of the cuffs or down inside of the booties can be really bad for the life of the suit. It can destroy the waterproofing treatment on the fabric. It can cause little pinholes, wear spots, hot spots, all of that bad stuff. So we want to make sure we've washed all the grit off of this or brushed all the grit off of this. And then the last thing I've got to say is if you're going to be using this suit in salt water, you want to make sure that before you go to on any of these drying steps, you actually rinse the whole thing off inside and outside in fresh water to get all of that salt off. All right, so we've got our dry gear dried off, we've got it cleaned off, and it's time to go ahead and store that gear now. And there's a couple of things that we want to avoid when we're looking for a good place to store the gear. And some of them are the same things that we're avoiding when we're trying to hang that gear. So we don't want exposure to UV light or sunlight. We don't want extreme temps, extreme hot or extreme cold. But the next thing that we want to avoid for storage is actually going to be exposure to fresh air. The ozone in air can actually cause those gaskets to degrade much quicker than they normally would. And so the best way to store these things is going to be in a closed space. I like to use a large Tupperware. Once I've got all my dry gear dried off and cleaned up, I roll it up, I throw it in a Tupperware, and I throw it in the back of my closet. That makes sure the temperature's good, make sure it's got the protection that it needs, and that's going to give me the best results for storing this thing over a period of time. If you're going to be storing it for a long time, a couple of months, a whole season, you want to make sure that you're sealing off as much of that air as possible. So some sort of sealed bag is actually great for storing these things over a long period of time. Next, we're going to talk about how to care for the fabric of your dry gear. The best thing you can do for that fabric is periodically come through and just rinse it off with warm water. And that'll do a few things. It'll go ahead and get rid of any grit that may still be hanging out on that dry suit or inside that dry suit, because you want to rinse the outside and the inside. And it'll also take out any oils or anything that may be sticking to the surface of that fabric that may degrade that fabric or degrade those gaskets. Now, if you do want to use some sort of product to wash this with, I would recommend that you go to the website of the manufacturer of your specific dry gear and look at what they suggest. There are all sorts of products out there for washing this waterproof material, and you just want to make sure that you're using the right one for the type of material that you've got. Now, eventually in the life of a dry suit, you will reach a point where it starts to wet out. And what that means is essentially the treatment that this fabric was originally created with has started to degrade to the point where that fabric is actually now starting to allow moisture through its weave. In this case, there are some products that you can get that are waterproofing treatments that will help to extend the life of that suit or that dry top just a little bit. However, there's really nothing on the market that I've found or heard of that's actually able to bring that suit back to its original level of waterproofness, or that will last as long as the original treatment. So once it is starting to wet out, at that point, we suggest, maybe it's time for a new piece of dry gear. Now, pretty much all dry suits these days use some sort of zipper, and we want to make sure that we're taking good care of those zippers. I know that most dry suits, when you get them, will come with some sort of zipper lube that's intended for the zipper that's been installed on that dry suit. I know that T-zip zippers have a specific T-zip zipper lube that comes with them. I believe YKK recommends using paraffin wax. I've even seen people use a little bit of chapstick in a pinch, when that zipper's really, really dry, you're about to get on the river and you don't have anything else to use. Generally, I'd recommend using something that is manufacturer recommended. So if you're curious about that, you can look up, the type of dry suit that you've got and what they recommend for that zipper. But the main thing to keep in mind with that zipper lube and why it's important is that it is not only making it easier for you to open and close that zipper, which is, removing friction from that system, helping that zipper last longer, but it's also a part of the waterproofing of the zipper system. So a well-lubed zipper, that lubrication is actually going to help keep that zipper waterproof. Whereas if you're allowing that zipper to dry out, you may actually be getting some water or some moisture coming in through that dry zipper. So it's important to make sure that you keep those zippers lubed up. Another important thing to consider as far as dry suit care is taking proper care of your booties. Now, most dry suits these days have some sort of fabric bootie. I know that there are maybe still a couple of models that are being made, and definitely some older models that use a latex bootie as well. And this little piece of advice applies to either one of those. But the main thing that you want to remember with those booties is that you want another layer over this that goes under your sandal or shoe to avoid grit putting holes in this bootie. So the way that I'll typically layer these things up is going to be a wool sock below, the bootie goes over the wool sock, then a neoprene sock goes over the bootie, and then your shoe or sandal goes over that. And the reason that we're going to such lengths to take care of those things is just that it's going to be a lot cheaper to replace that neoprene sock than it is going to be to patch or replace that bootie. The last thing that we're going to talk about today is going to be gasket care. Now, throughout the life of any dry suit, you're definitely going to have to replace these gaskets once or twice. However, correct care of these things can help to make sure that that is a minimal number of times and just help you to avoid some hassle. First thing you want to think about when you're putting this thing on or taking it off is just remove anything that could be a snag hazard. So rings, bracelets, watches, necklaces, anything that could grab a hold of that latex and tear it, you want to make sure is not going to be a problem for you. A lot of people like to use some sort of gasket treatment. This can be helpful for the lifetime of the gasket. I know IR is recommending that after each use, you've dried this thing off and then you're going to apply baby powder to the gaskets. NRS is recommending a silicone gel or a silicone spray that can be used to help preserve the gaskets. And I believe that Kokatat is still recommending the use of 303 for the gaskets, which is an aerospace protectant and can be sprayed onto the gaskets. Typically, you'll do that once every 2 to 4 weeks, depending on how heavy your use of the gaskets are. Now, all of these treatments are great to help extend the life of the gasket and also to help get that gasket on and off. Typically, they will help that gasket slide on and slide off a little bit more easily. And while they are great, they are not the be all and end all of gasket care. There's definitely a few other things you want to do to ensure a good long life. And some of those things we've talked about a little bit already, right? You don't want to expose these things to UV light unnecessarily for long periods of time. That can definitely degrade those gaskets. And one of the big things that we want to do is just store this correctly, right? We talked a little bit earlier about the ozone and fresh air degrading those gaskets. So storing these things correctly in a closed space, that's something that's sealed or very close to it. Typically a Tupperware or a sealed bag is going to go a long way towards extending the life of these gaskets. And lastly, avoiding any exposure to products like sunscreen or bug repellent, or really any other topical oils or skin creams or anything like that. I do know sunscreen in particular is actually capable of destroying a gasket over the course of a day. So you really want to keep that off of your gaskets. Well, that's pretty much everything I've got for you today on taking care of your dry gear. We hope to see y'all out there on the river soon. Enjoy it. And from everybody here at Endless River Adventures, we thank you.